I thought I had the perfect life. Every morning, the sunlight would stream through the blinds of my bedroom, casting warm golden stripes across the walls, and I would wake up to the sound of Sarah's laughter echoing from the kitchen. It was a simple sound, yet it had a way of making everything feel right in the world. For 3 years, he had been my constant, my safe harbor, the one I imagined growing old with. "Coffee's ready," Sarah called from the kitchen, his voice playful, teasing. I smiled, brushing a strand of hair from my face as I slipped on my slippers and walked toward him. The smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the small apartment, mixing with a faint aroma of vanilla from the candle I'd lit last night. It was cozy, it was perfect, and for a moment I allowed myself to believe that life was exactly where it should be. We had met in college during a late-night study session in the library. He had leaned over to ask if I needed help with my notes, and the rest, as they say, was history. Friends joked that we were inseparable, a modern-day love story unfolding with each passing day. Our families adored each other. We had dinner together every Sunday. I had thought, naively perhaps, that this bond was unshakable. But perfection is often a mask, and I was about to find out that the life I had trusted so deeply was built on illusions. I walked into the kitchen and found Sarah holding 2 mugs of steaming coffee. His smile was warm, his brown eyes sparkling. "Morning, Mia," he said softly, brushing my hand with his as he handed me a cup. "Sleep well," I nodded, sipping the coffee. "Yeah, better than usual," I replied. Truth was, I had been restless for days, a faint unease gnawing at the back of my mind. But I pushed it aside. Who could have guessed that the person I trusted most, my father, the man who had always protected me, could be hiding a secret that would shatter everything? We spent the morning like any other couple, laughing over small jokes, planning our weekend, discussing work. Yet underneath the surface, a quiet tension seemed to hum, though neither of us spoke of it. It was invisible, yet I could feel it, like a shadow stretching across the edges of my happiness. Later that day, I visited my father. His house was the same as always, warm, familiar, the smell of leather-bound books and polished wood greeting me as I stepped inside. He was in his study, looking over some papers. "Mia, come here," he called, his voice calm but carrying a weight I couldn't yet identify. I approached, smiling. "Hey, Dad. Everything okay?" He looked up, eyes serious, almost unreadable. Yes, everything's fine. I just wanted to talk to you about something important." Something in his tone made my stomach tighten. I nodded, sitting down across from him. He cleared his throat. "You know I want what's best for you, right?" "Of course," I said, smiling faintly. "You always do." He hesitated, and for a split second, I thought he might be about to share something wonderful, something that would bring us even closer. But instead, there was a pause, a silence so thick it pressed against my chest. And in that moment, I should have sensed it, should have realized that the world I thought I knew was about to crack wide open. At that time, though, I didn't know. I smiled, trying to ease the tension. "Dad, you're scaring me." "What is it?" He leaned back, eyes avoiding mine. "It's complicated. Let's just say sometimes the people we trust the most make decisions we don't expect." I laughed nervously. "Sounds mysterious. Are you talking about work or?" He shook his head. "No, not work. Personal. Family." I didn't press further. I had no idea that those words were the prelude to a betrayal that would cut deeper than any heartbreak I had ever imagined. That moment, I still believed in the perfection of my life, the laughter, the love, the warmth. I had no clue that the first crack in that perfect world had already appeared, hidden in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. And so I left my father's study with a light heart, unaware that in the coming days my entire life would be turned upside down by a single life-altering secret. Little did I know, the man I loved, the family I trusted, and the life I thought was mine were all part of a plan I could never have imagined. Perfection, I would soon learn, was a fragile illusion, and mine was about to shatter. It was a normal Saturday morning when my world began to unravel. I was sitting at the small breakfast table in my apartment, the steam from my coffee curling lazily into the air. Outside, the city buzzed as usual, Cars honking, people rushing, dogs barking, but inside everything felt eerily calm, a false sense of security I would soon regret. I opened my laptop to check emails, expecting the usual work notifications and newsletters. But then I saw it, an email from my father. The subject line was simple yet chilling. About Sarah. A shiver ran down my spine. Something about it felt wrong. I hesitated, hovering my mouse over the email, a strange mix of curiosity and dread pooling in my stomach. Finally, I clicked it. The words on the screen hit me like a physical blow. I have arranged for Sarah to marry your cousin. Mia can't provide the life Sarah deserves. $50,000 has been paid. It's for the best. I stared, blinked, reread. My vision blurred with disbelief. My father had paid my fiancé to leave me? To marry someone else? My cousin? The betrayal felt like a knife twisting in my chest, each word sharper than the last. I sank into my chair, heart hammering, chest tight, hands trembling. For a long moment, the room spun around me. I wanted to scream, to throw the laptop across the room, to demand answers. But instead, I felt frozen, the reality of the email sinking in like a stone in my stomach. My mind raced, trying to understand. Had Sarah known? Had my cousin been aware? Were they both part of this? Every memory of the past 3 years flashed before me. His smiles, his whispered "I love yous," the late-night conversations, the promises. Had it all been a lie? I could hear the imaginary echo of my father's words, as if he were standing beside me. Mia can't provide the life Sarah deserves. Life. Money. Status. The very things he believed could justify betrayal. I felt my chest tighten, tears welling in my eyes. I remember pacing the apartment, running my hands through my hair, muttering under my breath. No, this can't be real. This isn't real, but it was. It was painfully, horribly real. My thoughts turned chaotic. How long had he been planning this? Was this email the first hint, or had I unknowingly been living in a trap set years before? I replayed every conversation, every interaction, trying to catch the hidden signs. But there were none, or maybe I had been too blind to see them. The betrayal wasn't just from Sarah or my cousin. It was my father, the one person I had believed would always protect me. My protector had chosen money and control over my happiness. My life, it seemed, had been treated as a transaction. I sank onto the couch, feeling hollow. Anger surged, but so did sorrow. I had loved him, loved Sarah, and now I realized that love had been powerless against greed. I felt a wave of humiliation, as though the foundation of my life had been stripped away, leaving me exposed and raw. Hours passed, though I can't say exactly how long. I stared at the screen, at the words that had destroyed everything I had believed in. I considered replying, confronting, demanding explanations, but something inside me whispered otherwise. There would be no confrontation, no pleas, no begging. I remembered the times I had cried in secret, late at night, feeling small, broken, unheard. And in that memory, a spark ignited, a quiet, fierce determination. They thought they could control my life, they were gravely mistaken. They thought betrayal would break me, they were about to learn how wrong they were. I closed the laptop with deliberate calm, my mind shifting from shock to resolve. Path ahead was uncertain, dark, and terrifying, but it was mine to walk. And I would walk it alone if I had to. I spent the rest of the day in silence, replaying the email over and over in my mind. I could almost hear Sarah laughing in the apartment, unaware of what had been decided, and my cousin, perhaps smiling at the thought of what was about to happen. I clenched my fists, breathing heavily, letting the fury, heartbreak, and resolve merge into a single driving force. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces, smiling, confident, unaware that their plans were about to collide with the woman they had underestimated. I realized something important. This was not the end. It was a beginning. A beginning of a life I would forge for myself, stronger than anything they could imagine. And as I drifted into a restless sleep, I made a silent vow to myself. I would rise, and when they saw me again, it would be nothing short of shocking. The next morning, I woke up with a heavy heart and a restless mind. Sleep hadn't comforted me. It had only given my thoughts room to replay the email over and over. My father had paid Sarah to leave me, to marry my cousin, and the reality was so surreal that I kept pinching myself, half expecting to wake from a nightmare. I replayed every moment with Sarah in my head, the laughter, the quiet late-night talks, the times he had held my hand a little too long, whispered my name softly when no one was around. Had it all been a lie? A performance arranged to make my life easier to manipulate? The betrayal was not just a stab in the heart. It was a flood, an avalanche of doubt, heartbreak, and disbelief that threatened to consume me entirely. I tried calling him, my hand shaking as I dialed Sarah's number. "Sarah, we need to talk," I whispered when he answered. But even through the phone, I could hear a distance I hadn't noticed before. His voice sounded calm, too calm, almost rehearsed, as if nothing had changed. I couldn't find the right words, couldn't breathe. How could someone I loved, someone I had trusted with everything, be a part of this? The night after discovering the email, sleep refused to come. I sat on my small apartment floor, the laptop closed beside me, staring at the city skyline through the window. The lights flickered like distant stars, oblivious to my heartbreak, oblivious to the betrayal that had shaken my life to its core. I replayed everything again and again. My father, the man who had promised to protect me, had made a calculated decision to manipulate my life. Sarah, the man I had loved with my entire heart, had agreed, or at least gone along with it. My cousin, a part of the family I thought I could trust, was now complicit. My life, it seemed, was no longer mine. Tears came, hot and unrelenting. I cried not just for the love I had lost, but for the innocence that had been stolen, for the trust one had placed in people who clearly did not deserve it. My chest ached, my vision blurred, and for the first time in years, I felt completely, utterly alone. But amidst the pain, clarity began to emerge. I realized something important. Confrontation, anger, and pleading would not repair what had been done. They had already made their choices. They had decided to place money and convenience above my happiness. And no amount of shouting, crying, or reasoning could change that. I understood then that I had a choice. I could stay, fight, and allow myself to be dragged through humiliation and betrayal, or I could leave quietly and deliberately and take control of the one thing no one could ever touch, my life. I chose the latter. I packed slowly, methodically. There was no dramatic flinging of clothes, no slammed doors. Each item I placed in my bag was a deliberate symbol of the life I was leaving behind. My favorite sweater, the mug Sarah had given me on my birthday, even the small photo of my family, weapons of memory I left behind not because I hated them, but because I no longer needed reminders of betrayal. As I zipped up the bag, I felt a strange mix of sorrow and empowerment. Sorrow for the life I had lost, yes, but empowerment for the life I was about to create. I would not be defined by their decisions, by their greed, or by their attempts to control me. I would define myself. Walking out of the apartment, I felt the cool night air on my face, the city alive with its usual chaos, completely indifferent to my pain. And for the first time, that indifference felt liberating. The world didn't care about my heartbreak, and that was exactly how I wanted it. My life was mine now, free of manipulation, free of betrayal, free to be built according to my own vision. I decided to move to a city far away, a place where no one knew me, a place where I could start anew. I rented a small, modest apartment, bare walls, a simple bed, a tiny kitchen, but it was mine. Every object I owned was now a tool, a building block, a symbol of independence. At first, it wasn't easy. I took on odd jobs, anything that allowed me to pay rent and buy food. Days were long, exhausting, and filled with moments of doubt. Nights were even harder. I questioned myself constantly. Could I really build a life from scratch? Could I overcome the heartbreak, the betrayal, and the loneliness? And yet, every day I woke up and reminded myself, this was my path, my choice, my life. I could let pain define me, or I could let it fuel me. And slowly, I began to realize that the betrayal I had suffered, the heartbreak I had endured, was not a sentence. It was a catalyst. I began planning my future in earnest. I wrote down goals, small and large, and devised strategies to achieve them. I studied relentlessly, honed my skills, and networked with anyone who would listen. I refused to be intimidated by my lack of experience or my humble beginnings. Every rejection became a lesson, every failure a stepping stone, and every lonely night a reminder of the strength I was cultivating. In the quiet moments, I reflected on the people who had betrayed me. My father, Sarah, my cousin, they had all underestimated me. I hung up before I could confront him, tears blurring my vision. The betrayal wasn't just from the man I loved, it was my father, the one person who had always told me he wanted the best for me. He had made a decision about my life as if I were a business deal, as if love could be bought or sold. And then there was my cousin, smiling and laughing in family gatherings, oblivious or complicit, I didn't know which. The world I had trusted had crumbled. Every family dinner, every holiday, every casual conversation felt tainted. I felt hollow, as though someone had carved out a piece of me and left a void in its place. People I had loved and trusted most had conspired against me, and I was left with nothing but questions and heartbreak. But in that heartbreak, something unexpected began to grow. A strange, quiet resolve. I realized that pleading, arguing, or confronting them wouldn't fix anything. If I wanted to reclaim my life, if I wanted to prove my worth, I couldn't do it by relying on anyone else. I had to leave quietly and rebuild myself from the ground up. I began packing that afternoon. Not dramatically, not with anger or fury, just calmly, methodically. My bag was small, a few clothes, my laptop, important documents. I left behind the luxury and familiarity I had grown up with, the home that now felt like a cage, and the people who had betrayed me. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't leave a note. They didn't deserve the satisfaction of knowing the depth of my pain. The walk to the train station felt surreal. I kept my head down, blending into the crowd, pretending I belonged. But inside, my mind was alive with plans, strategies, dreams. I promised myself one thing: they would never see me broken again. Every tear I had shed, every sleepless night, every pang of betrayal would be transformed into fuel for my journey. For weeks, I traveled to a city that no one knew me in, a place where my past couldn't follow me, where I could start anew. I rented a small apartment, bare but mine. I took odd jobs, worked late nights, and slowly built a rhythm that centered around one goal: to become someone they could never ignore or underestimate again. Every day, I reminded myself of their betrayal, not to fuel hatred, but to ignite determination. I visualized Sarah, my father, my cousin, their smug confidence, their plans, and I let it drive me. Pain had a purpose now. It wasn't about revenge, it was about rising. Every rejection at work, every struggle with money, every moment of loneliness was a stepping stone toward the life I was determined to create. And slowly, I began to notice changes. I grew stronger. My mind became sharper. My confidence, once fragile and uncertain, began to solidify like steel tempered in fire. I didn't need anyone's validation, I only needed to see my own reflection and know I was surviving, thriving, and growing. I remember the first night I realized something had shifted. I was sitting by my small window, looking at the city lights, and I felt it, a quiet, almost shocking sense of empowerment. I was no longer the girl who had been betrayed. I was becoming a woman who could thrive despite betrayal, who could turn heartbreak into strategy, and who could rise in ways no one had anticipated. That night, I made another silent vow: I would never again allow anyone to dictate my worth. I would rebuild my life, not for revenge, but for me. And one day, they would see the woman I had become. Not shattered, not small, but powerful, confident, and untouchable. The betrayal had shattered my world, but it had also lit a fire inside me that I would carry forever. They believed that money, manipulation, and betrayal could define my life. They believed I would crumble. But I was learning, slowly but surely, that real power does not come from wealth or influence. It comes from resilience, determination, and self-belief. By the time weeks turned into months, I could feel the change within me. I was no longer the broken girl who had discovered that email. I was someone new, someone growing stronger with every challenge. My mind was sharper, my confidence firmer, and my resolve unshakable. And every night as I lay in my small, sparsely furnished apartment, I made the same vow: I will rise. I will build a life they cannot imagine. And one day, when they see me again, they will realize that I was never powerless. I was untouchable. That night, heartbreak transformed into strategy, betrayal transformed into ambition, and sorrow transformed into purpose. I wasn't leaving behind my past because I forgot it. I was leaving it behind because I refused to let it control my future. And so, with a small bag, a determined heart, and a mind set on building a life that belonged only to me, I stepped out into the city lights, unaware of the incredible journey that awaited me, but knowing one thing for certain: I was no longer the girl who had been discarded. I was Mia, and I was about to rise. The first morning in my new city, I woke up to the distant hum of traffic and the faint smell of roasted coffee from the corner cafe below. My apartment was bare, just a small bed, a desk, and a chair, but it was mine, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of freedom. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the life I had left behind, it was all gone, replaced by possibility. I brewed a simple cup of coffee and sat by the window, staring at the skyline. The city seemed alive with opportunity, bustling with people chasing dreams, ambitions, and fortunes. And somehow that chaos felt like a promise. A promise that I could start over, that I could take the broken pieces of my life and shape them into something powerful, something untouchable. I knew the road ahead would not be easy. I had nothing, no connections, no safety net, no support system, but I had determination. I had resolve. And above all, I had a fire inside me that no betrayal could extinguish. I started with odd jobs, waitressing at a small cafe, tutoring college students in the evenings, even working as a freelance assistant to local businesses. The days were long, physically exhausting, mentally draining, but each small paycheck, each tiny victory reminded me that I was taking control. Every rejection, every setback only fueled my determination further. At night, when the city was quiet and the apartment empty, I began planning. I wrote goals down in a notebook, detailing everything I wanted to achieve, from mastering new skills to building a career that would make my past life look insignificant. I studied, researched, and networked relentlessly. Slowly, the girl who had been betrayed began to transform into a woman who could rise above it all. One day, I received a call from a small marketing firm looking for an intern. I knew it wasn't glamorous, but it was a foot in the door. I threw myself into the role, staying late, learning everything I could, and volunteering for projects no one else wanted. I wanted to prove, first to myself and then to the world, that I was capable of more than anyone had ever believed. Months passed, and my efforts began to show results. A project I led successfully earned recognition from senior management. My confidence grew, and so did my network. I wasn't just surviving, I was building a life, brick by brick, with sweat, intellect, and determination. But this journey wasn't only about work. I also began to invest in myself, physically, mentally, emotionally. I exercised regularly, ate healthier, and focused on developing a presence that radiated confidence. I practiced speaking clearly, dressing with intention, and carrying myself with poise. Every detail mattered because I knew that the world judges you not only on what you achieve but on how you carry yourself while doing it. I also allowed myself to process the emotional scars. I wrote letters I would never send, expressing the anger, pain, and disappointment I had felt. I cried, sometimes for hours, letting the sorrow wash over me, and then I would rise, stronger than before. I realized that real power comes not from suppressing pain but from channeling it into strength. By the time a year had passed, I was no longer just a survivor. I had carved out a name for myself in the small professional circles I had entered. People began noticing my drive, my competence, and my presence. And more importantly, I had begun to feel a sense of pride that had nothing to do with anyone else. I was building my life on my terms, and that satisfaction was intoxicating. Despite all this growth, a quiet thought lingered at the back of my mind. One day I would return to the world I had left behind. Not for revenge, not for confrontation, but to show them what they had lost. The betrayal that had once shattered me would now serve as proof of my resilience, of my ability to rise above manipulation and heartbreak. And yet, I knew that moment was far in the future. For now, I focused on building, learning, and thriving. I embraced every small victory, celebrated every milestone, and refused to let the ghosts of my past haunt me. The city, once intimidating and unfamiliar, had become my arena, and I was ready to dominate it. By the end of that first year, I had transformed. I wasn't the broken girl who had received that devastating email. I was a woman of ambition, strength, and confidence. My life was mine, untethered from betrayal, independent, and growing stronger by the day. And deep down, I knew that the next time I faced the people who had tried to control my life, I would do so not as a victim, but as someone they could no longer ignore. I had escaped the past, but I hadn't escaped my destiny. It was just beginning, and it was mine. The city was unforgiving. Every corner held a new challenge, every interaction a test of my resilience. But I was learning to embrace it. Each rejection, each door slammed in my face wasn't a sign of failure. It was a challenge, a way to sharpen my focus and build my strength. I worked tirelessly, taking on projects no one else wanted, staying late at the marketing firm, volunteering for extra tasks, and studying on my own time. My small apartment became a fortress of ambition, the walls lined with notebooks, plans, and strategies. Every night, I documented my progress, reflecting on what worked, what didn't, and what I could improve. Sometimes, exhaustion hit me so hard I felt I might collapse. There were moments when I questioned whether I was strong enough to continue. But in those moments, I thought of the email, my father's calculated betrayal, Sarah's silent complicity, my cousin's smug indifference, and I refused to let their actions define me. If anything, they had given me a fire that no obstacle could extinguish. I sought knowledge relentlessly. I read books on business, psychology, and leadership. I attended workshops, networking events, and seminars, often feeling out of place, a small fish among bigger, more experienced players. But I reminded myself that every master was once a beginner. Every person who seemed untouchable had started somewhere. And now this was my beginning. There were moments of doubt, sure. I remember one evening when I received a rejection letter for a position I had desperately wanted. I sat on my apartment floor, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of failure pressing down on me. The thought of giving up whispered in my mind. But I didn't. I reminded myself of every step I had taken, every night I had pushed through exhaustion, every small victory along the way. I stood up, wiped my tears, and planned my next move. Slowly, the pieces began to fall into place. A senior colleague noticed my dedication and offered me a larger project, one that had the potential to make a real impact. I poured every ounce of energy I had into it, analyzing every detail, anticipating every problem, and presenting solutions that impressed even the most critical managers. The recognition I received was a validation not just of skill, but of resilience. I began to realize that the struggles I had endured were not setbacks, they were training. Each obstacle had taught me patience, perseverance, and the importance of preparation. Each challenge had strengthened my resolve and sharpened my instincts. I was no longer reacting to life, I was shaping it. Socially, I started building a network of like-minded individuals who respected ambition and determination. I joined professional groups, attended industry mixers, and connected with mentors who could guide me. I learned that survival alone wasn't enough. Growth required relationships, strategy, and visibility. And amid all this, I took time to nurture myself. I exercised, honed my appearance, and carried myself with intentionality. Confidence became more than a feeling. It became a habit, a presence that others could sense even before words were spoken. Every glance, every handshake, every conversation reinforced the fact that Mia was no longer a girl who could be dismissed. Months turned into a year, and my life began to transform. What had started as a struggle to survive evolved into a journey of achievement. I secured a promotion, led major campaigns, and started being recognized as a rising talent in the industry. Success, no matter how small, reminded me that betrayal had been the catalyst, not the barrier. But even as I thrived professionally, the thought of returning to my old life lingered. I didn't want revenge in the traditional sense, but I knew that one day those who had betrayed me would see me. And when that day came, they wouldn't just witness success, they would witness the result of underestimating someone they thought they could control. Late one night, I sat at my apartment desk, reviewing a major project I was about to present to the board. The city lights twinkled outside, and I felt a profound sense of clarity. I was no longer the powerless girl who had cried over a betrayal. I was a strategist, a rising professional, a woman building a life that no one could touch. And in that clarity, I realized the ultimate lesson: life doesn't hand you power, you earn it. And sometimes the hardest, most painful experiences are the ones that prepare you to wield it. By the time the project presentation ended successfully, I had not only proven my capabilities to others but to myself. The woman who had been discarded, betrayed, and abandoned had risen stronger than ever. I had transformed heartbreak into ambition, betrayal into resilience, and despair into unstoppable drive. And yet, in the quiet moments, I could feel the story of my past creeping back into my thoughts. The email, the betrayal, the heartbreak, they were not forgotten. They were reminders, not of pain, but of fuel for the next stage of my life. The next stage where, when the time came, I would face those who had wronged me, not as a victim, but as a woman they could never ignore. After months of relentless effort, the day came when all my late nights, sacrifices, and small victories began to converge into something undeniable: my first real career breakthrough. It wasn't sudden, it was the result of countless small steps, each one building on the last, but the moment it arrived, it felt monumental. I had been working on a complex marketing campaign for a client whose brand was struggling to regain relevance. Project was high risk, high stakes, and no one in the firm wanted to touch it. Most saw it as a guaranteed failure. But I saw opportunity. I studied the market meticulously, analyzed every competitor, and crafted a plan that was bold, unconventional, and precise. The night before the presentation, I barely slept. My apartment was littered with notes, diagrams, and reports. I rehearsed every line of my pitch, anticipating questions, objections, and potential pushbacks. My heart pounded with nervous energy, but it wasn't fear, it was anticipation. I had worked too hard to falter now. The morning of the presentation, I walked into the boardroom with my usual calm, confident demeanor. The room was filled with senior executives, some skeptical, some curious, and a few who had underestimated me from the beginning. I could feel their eyes on me, weighing, judging, but instead of intimidation, I felt power. Every glance reminded me of how far I had come. I started my presentation, voice steady, gestures precise. I highlighted data points, proposed creative strategies, and articulated a vision for the brand's revival that was both innovative and actionable. I could see the initial skepticism fading as I spoke, replaced by intrigue. I explained risks, presented solutions, and showcased projections with clarity and authority. Halfway through, one of the senior executives, known for being particularly critical, leaned back in his chair and raised an eyebrow. "You're ambitious," he said, almost incredulously. "But can this really work?" I smiled calmly and responded, "It's not just about ambition, it's about execution. And every step I've outlined is actionable, measurable, and realistic. I've accounted for potential pitfalls, and the strategy is designed to adapt as the market shifts. I'm confident in the results." The room fell silent for a moment. Then, slowly, nods began to appear. By the end of the presentation, applause filled the room, not overly dramatic but sincere. My ideas had not only been accepted but celebrated. Client approved the strategy immediately, and my name was mentioned repeatedly as the driving force behind the campaign. Walking out of the boardroom, I felt an incredible mix of relief and exhilaration. This wasn't just a professional victory, it was proof. Proof that I was no longer the girl who had been discarded, underestimated, and betrayed. I had transformed heartbreak into strategy, betrayal into determination, and pain into power. That evening, I allowed myself a small celebration. I walked through the city streets, lights reflecting off wet pavement from an earlier rain. The world felt alive, almost conspiratorial, as if it recognized the transformation I had undergone. I had started with nothing, and now I was someone to be noticed, someone to be taken seriously. But the breakthrough wasn't just about recognition, it was about confidence. For the first time, I understood the magnitude of what I had achieved on my own. No one had handed me this opportunity. I had seized it. Every late night, every moment of doubt, every struggle had culminated in this undeniable moment of validation. I also began to notice subtle shifts in how people treated me. Colleagues who had previously ignored me now sought my opinion. Junior staff looked to me for guidance. Even the senior executives who had doubted me began to treat me with newfound respect. It was a small taste of the power that comes from true competence, one that can't be bought, manipulated, or handed over. And yet, despite all the success, a quiet thought lingered. One day, those who had once betrayed me would witness this transformation. My father, Sarah, my cousin, they had underestimated me, dismissed me, and tried to control my life. But soon they would see not just success, but the unstoppable woman I had become. I continued to build, refine, and expand my influence. I attended conferences, networked with industry leaders, and took on larger, more complex projects. My reputation grew, and with it, my confidence. I no longer felt the need to prove myself to anyone except myself. The woman who had once been heartbroken and discarded now commanded her own destiny. Late at night, after the day's work was done, I often reflected on the journey. The betrayal that had once seemed like the end had, in reality, been a beginning. It had forced me out of comfort, away from complacency, and into a life where I was responsible for nothing but my own growth and success. By the time a year had passed since my escape, I had achieved milestones I hadn't dared to dream of in that first month. Recognition, influence, and financial independence were all within my grasp. And yet, more than anything, I cherished the transformation of my mind, my heart, and my spirit. I had become someone no one could break, control, or underestimate. And as I looked at myself in the mirror one evening, brushing hair from my face and straightening my posture, I whispered quietly, "They will see you now." Not the girl they discarded, not the one they thought they could control, but the woman you were always meant to be. It had been almost 3 years since I had left my old life behind. The betrayal, the heartbreak, and the life I thought I had lost. In that time, I had rebuilt everything. A career I was proud of, independence I had fought for, and a confidence that radiated with every step I took. Yet, nothing could have prepared me for the moment I walked into the cafe that afternoon. I had chosen a quiet spot near the window, sipping my latte and reviewing a project plan for a major client. The soft hum of conversation around me, the clinking of coffee cups, and the scent of fresh pastries created a calm, almost cinematic background. I felt at peace, fully absorbed in my world, when I heard a voice that made my heart skip. "Mia." I froze. Slowly, I looked up. And there he was, Sarah. Older, more polished, but unmistakably him. His eyes widened in recognition, and for the first time in years I saw the shock, the hesitation, and the disbelief in his face. Time seemed to slow. Memories of betrayal, heartbreak, and those dark days flooded back, but I didn't feel the same fear or pain I had once known. Instead, there was clarity. I had changed. I had grown. And in that moment, I knew I had the upper hand, not because I wanted revenge, but because I had built a life they couldn't touch. Sarah's voice trembled slightly as he spoke. I didn't expect to see you here." I smiled, a quiet, knowing smile. "I'm full of surprises," I said, letting the words hang in the air. Calmness in my tone contrasted sharply with the chaos that must have been running through his mind. I could see the questions in his eyes. He was probably asking himself how I had gone from the girl he thought he knew to the woman sitting confidently before him. The years of underestimation, of betrayal, had created a distance he hadn't anticipated, and it was clear he hadn't realized the fire I had cultivated. My cousin appeared beside him, equally stunned. The man who had benefited from my father's manipulation, the person who had assumed I would crumble, now looked like a ghost of his expectations. I could see the disbelief, almost palpable, as if they were both grappling with the realization that the person they had dismissed had become untouchable. I took a deep breath, letting my calm demeanor reinforce the power I now held. "It's been a long time," I said softly, almost conversationally. but the weight behind the words was unmistakable. I had survived, thrived, and transformed while they had remained the same. Sarah opened his mouth, probably to say something, but the words didn't come. I could see the conflict in his eyes. He wanted to speak, to justify, maybe even to apologize, but the hesitation betrayed his uncertainty. He had never expected that the girl he had been paid to leave would return with a life he could never imagine. I realized then that the power of this moment wasn't in confrontation. It wasn't in arguments, accusations, or pleas. It was in presence. Every step I took, every gesture, every quiet confidence in my posture was a statement. I was no longer a girl they could manipulate. I was a woman who had built her world from the ground up. We stood there, the three of us in the middle of the cafe, the hum of other patrons fading into insignificance. Their shock was complete. They hadn't just lost me, they had underestimated me. And the realization was written all over their faces. In that moment, I understood something profound. Power doesn't come from revenge. It comes from proof, from living a life so fully and completely that those who doubted you cannot ignore it. And proof, I realized, was far more satisfying than any argument or confrontation could ever be. Sarah finally spoke, his voice quiet, almost reverent. You've changed. You're different. I nodded, letting a small smile play on my lips. I had to change, I said. Not for you, not for anyone else, for me. My cousin said nothing. His eyes were wide, his mouth slightly open. He had assumed he would inherit the situation, the relationship, the life they had thought they could control. But I had taken control of my destiny, and now they were forced to witness it firsthand. I realized then that this encounter, unexpected as it was, marked a pivotal moment. I had come face to face with the past, not as a victim, but as someone transformed. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the abandonment, all of it had been a crucible, forging a life stronger, more resilient, and more powerful than I had ever imagined. As I stepped away from the table, leaving them in stunned silence, I felt a sense of completion. This wasn't the climax of revenge, it was the quiet triumph of living fully, independently, and unapologetically. And as I walked out into the afternoon sun, I knew that the final chapters of my journey were still ahead, but I would face them as a woman they could never control or underestimate. The wedding hall was alive with laughter, music, and the soft chatter of family and friends. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, and the scent of fresh flowers mingled with the aroma of fine cuisine. Guests mingled, smiling and greeting one another, unaware of the storm about to hit from the past. I had dressed simply yet elegantly, nothing ostentatious, nothing designed to flaunt. But every detail was intentional. The way my hair fell, the confidence in my posture, the calm, assured smile I carried. I had built this presence over years of struggle, and now it was time to let it speak for itself. As I entered the hall, I noticed the familiar faces in the crowd. My father, once commanding and controlling, looked pleased at the celebration, unaware of how drastically my life had changed. Sarah and my cousin were there too, smiling, chatting, completely confident that life was exactly as they had arranged it years ago. But then our eyes met. The moment they saw me, time seemed to freeze. Sarah's jaw dropped slightly, his confident demeanor faltering. My cousin's face went pale, eyes wide with disbelief. For the first time in years, they realized that their carefully orchestrated plan had backfired in ways they hadn't imagined. They had assumed that I would remain broken, powerless, and distant, a ghost of the girl who once loved and trusted blindly. Instead, they were confronted with a woman who had rebuilt herself from nothing, a life defined not by their choices, but by her own resilience, determination, and brilliance. I walked past them, a subtle, knowing smile on my lips. I didn't need words. Every step, every confident gesture, communicated what they could not ignore. I had risen, and nothing they had done could diminish me now. Sarah finally broke the stunned silence. Mia, you what? His voice trailed off, disbelief mingling with a hint of guilt. I didn't respond immediately. I let him stew in the moment, letting the weight of my transformation sink in. This wasn't about confrontation or revenge. It was about presence. It was about letting the life I had built, the success I had earned, and the confidence I exuded speak louder than any argument ever could. My father, too, looked uneasy. The man who had once dictated the course of my life now seemed powerless to influence the trajectory I had chosen for myself. He opened his mouth, probably to offer a word of approval or perhaps a justification, but I knew it would fall flat. Authority without respect, control without understanding, was meaningless against a life built from resilience and ambition. Even my cousin, who had benefited most from the betrayal, seemed shaken. He had assumed I would crumble, that the $50,000 deal and family manipulation would secure his place. But here I was, more composed, confident, and successful than he could have imagined. The reality hit him like a cold, sharp wave. The woman they had underestimated was untouchable. As I mingled with other guests, exchanging polite smiles and greetings, I could sense the subtle shifts in attention. Whispers floated across the room, snippets of curiosity and admiration. "Who is she?" someone asked. "I haven't seen her before, but she carries herself with such confidence." It was validation not just of appearance, but of transformation. My presence alone commanded respect and attention. I found myself thinking of all the small victories that had led to this moment: the late nights studying, the early mornings working odd jobs, the projects I had led, the challenges I had overcome. Each had been a step toward this very scene, a culmination of effort, strategy, and relentless perseverance. Sarah and my cousin attempted to approach, to speak, to reclaim some semblance of control. But every move they made felt awkward, forced, a reminder of their failed assumptions. I had become the architect of my own life, and they were mere spectators now, unable to undo what they had tried to orchestrate. I caught my father's eye across the room. There was regret there, subtle but unmistakable. Perhaps he finally understood the cost of his decisions, consequences of placing money and convenience above love and trust. But it was too late. The lesson had been learned, not by lecture or confrontation, but by living proof. I had risen above betrayal, stronger and more capable than ever. And then, as if to punctuate the moment, my mentor approached me, a proud smile on his face. "Mia, the board is talking about you. They're impressed with everything you've accomplished." Hearing this in the midst of the wedding, where my past, my betrayal, and my transformation converged, felt poetic. I wasn't seeking revenge, but recognition, validation, and respect, and now I glanced once more at Sarah and my cousin. Their expressions said everything: shock, disbelief, and the dawning realization that the girl they had thought powerless had become a woman beyond their comprehension. And in that moment, I understood something profound. True triumph is not about proving someone wrong, it's about proving yourself right. It's about building a life so compelling, so undeniable that those who doubted you are left in awe, not because you shouted it at them, but because your existence embodies it. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations, polite conversation, and quiet satisfaction. I mingled, laughed, and celebrated not just the wedding, but the life I had fought to create. And somewhere deep inside, I knew the final chapters of this story were still ahead, waiting to fully reveal the extent of my transformation. The wedding hall was buzzing, full of laughter and chatter, but for me, time seemed to move differently. Every glance, every whispered reaction, every subtle shift in body language from Sarah, my cousin, and my father felt magnified. Their disbelief, their shock, it was palpable. But I wasn't here to gloat. I was here to exist in my truth, to show that the life I had fought to create could never be denied. The moment came when my brother, the groom, asked me to give a small toast. Normally, this would have been nerve-wracking, but I felt a calm confidence settle over me. Standing before the guests, I looked at the familiar faces, some curious, some oblivious, and then locked eyes with Sarah and my cousin. Their expressions mirrored a mixture of guilt, awe, and uncertainty. I raised my glass, my voice steady, carrying both warmth and authority. Today is a celebration, not just of marriage, but of life, growth, and the journeys we each take. We don't always see the struggles others face, the battles fought in silence, or the victories earned quietly. But those victories exist, they are real and they are powerful. A murmur ran through the room. Sarah's eyes flickered with recognition. My cousin's jaw tightened, and even my father's confident posture seemed to falter. They had underestimated me, assumed I would fade into the shadows. But here I was, commanding attention without needing to demand it. I continued, letting every word convey the strength I had cultivated over years of hardship. Life has a way of teaching us lessons we never expected. Some lessons are painful, some are difficult, but every lesson shapes us. And sometimes, the greatest triumph is simply surviving, learning, and rising stronger than ever. The applause that followed was genuine, not just polite claps, but the kind of acknowledgement that comes from respect earned, not attention sought. And as I scanned the room, I noticed the subtle but undeniable changes in the expressions around me: admiration, curiosity, and in some cases, disbelief that the woman before them had once been the girl they had dismissed. Sarah approached after the toast, hesitating. I could feel the conflict in him: guilt, regret, and perhaps the dawning understanding of the consequences of his choices. "Mia," he began, his voice tentative, searching for words that might explain the past. I smiled faintly, calm and composed. "The past is the past," I said softly, but with unyielding strength. "What matters is the present and what we do with the lives we build from here." He looked at me, studying the woman I had become. It was clear he understood, finally, that I was no longer someone he could control, influence, or manipulate. My choices, my resilience, and my triumph were now undeniable proof of my power. My cousin remained silent, still processing the reality that the carefully orchestrated plan he had once benefited from had failed spectacularly. The arrogance and confidence he had relied on now seemed fragile, and for once I felt no anger, only quiet satisfaction. I had not needed to confront him with rage. My life itself was the statement. Even my father, who had orchestrated the betrayal, seemed uneasy. The man who had once dictated my path now realized that his decisions could not define me. Money, manipulation, and control had failed. I had survived, thrived, and surpassed every expectation placed upon me. And in that moment, the realization struck him, and perhaps it was the most powerful triumph of all for me, that love, resilience, and determination could never be bought or silenced. As the evening continued, I mingled with guests, sharing smiles, laughter, and polite conversation. Every interaction reinforced the transformation I had undergone. I was no longer the girl left behind. I was a woman of agency, power, and undeniable presence. Later, as I stepped onto the balcony to catch a breath of night air, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. From the moment I had discovered the email, my father's betrayal, Sarah's complicity, my cousin's opportunism, I had felt a mixture of heartbreak, anger, and disbelief. But instead of letting those emotions destroy me, I had channeled them into determination, strategy, and action. I had left the life they thought they could control, traveled to a new city, and painstakingly built a career, a reputation, and a life that belonged only to me. Every late night, every rejection, every moment of doubt had forged me into someone unbreakable. The ultimate triumph wasn't in their shock or disbelief, it was in my life itself. The success, independence, and confidence I had cultivated were proof of something far greater than revenge. They were proof that betrayal could be transformed into fuel, heartbreak into strategy, and pain into unstoppable power. And as I looked down at the wedding hall below, filled with laughter, light, and celebration, I realized that my journey was not just a personal victory, it was a testament that even when life deals you the cruelest cards, you can rise, rebuild, and surpass every expectation. You can create a life so compelling, so undeniable that the world can't help but notice. And for the first time in years, I smiled fully, without hesitation or doubt. I had survived the ultimate betrayal. I had thrived against every obstacle. And when they looked at me, Sarah, my cousin, my father, they didn't see the girl they had tried to control. They saw the woman I had always been capable of becoming, resilient, powerful, and untouchable. The reception was winding down. Guests were saying their goodbyes, laughter and music fading into soft echoes. I stood near the balcony overlooking the city lights, feeling a sense of calm I hadn't experienced in years. Everything had led to this moment: heartbreak, betrayal, struggle, and ultimately triumph. Sarah and my cousin were still inside, exchanging glances that spoke volumes. Guilt, disbelief, and admiration mingled in their expressions, though neither would admit it aloud. My father had left early, likely returning to the life he thought he controlled, unaware that I had surpassed the confines of his influence entirely. I took a deep breath, reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. The email, the cruel, calculated betrayal, had been a turning point. It had felt like the end of the world, but it became the catalyst for everything that followed. I had left the life that was handed to me and built my own, brick by brick, choice by choice. I remembered the nights of loneliness in that small apartment, working late into the night, surviving on determination, and chasing a vision that no one else could see. Every small step, every rejection, every challenge, every victory had prepared me for this moment of quiet empowerment. I was no longer a girl shaped by others' decisions. I was a woman fully in command of her own destiny. I glanced back into the hall one last time. Sarah's eyes met mine. There was no need for words, he finally understood. He had tried to manipulate my life, to bend it according to his and my father's plan, but he had underestimated me. And now, he saw the undeniable result: a woman who had turned betrayal into power and heartbreak into unstoppable determination. My cousin, who had once thought he could profit from my misfortune, remained speechless. I didn't need to confront him with anger or resentment. My life itself was the statement. Every success, every confident smile, every step I took was proof that the years of planning against me had failed. Even my father, though absent, had been rendered powerless by the undeniable proof of my independence and success. The control he had sought to impose had dissolved under the weight of my choices. I had learned the most valuable lesson: no one can dictate your worth except yourself. I realized then that the true closure didn't come from confrontation, didn't come from apologies, explanations, or revenge. True closure came from living fully, thriving authentically, and claiming the life you were meant to lead. That life was mine, and it had nothing to do with their influence or approval. In the quiet of the balcony, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. I thought about the years of struggle, the sacrifices, and the moments of doubt. Each one had shaped me into someone resilient, strategic, and empowered. Each heartbreak had become fuel, each betrayal a lesson in trust, perseverance, and self-worth. And then a subtle smile spread across my face. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to prove anything to anyone. The victories were mine, the journey was mine, and the transformation was mine. I had endured, I had survived, and I had risen. As I looked out at the city skyline, I imagined the future. Opportunities, challenges, successes, and adventures awaited me. This was not just an ending, it was the beginning of something even greater. I had reclaimed my narrative, and now I could author the next chapters of my life with full intention and clarity. I felt a lightness in my chest, a sense of freedom that had been absent for years. I had conquered the past, faced the people who had underestimated me, and emerged stronger, wiser, and more confident than ever. This was empowerment in its purest form, the quiet, undeniable kind that doesn't need witnesses or applause to validate it. And yet I knew the story was about proving to myself that I was capable of resilience, success, and joy regardless of the obstacles placed in my path. That realization brought a profound sense of peace. As the last guests departed, I turned from the balcony, ready to step into the next chapter of my life. The city lights reflected off the glass, mirroring the glow of possibility. I had left behind betrayal, heartbreak, and doubt. What remained was power, confidence, and a life built entirely on my terms. In the quiet aftermath, I understood the true power of my journey. People who once tried to control me, Sarah, my cousin, even my father, had become spectators to a life they could never manipulate. Their disbelief was a testament to the strength I had cultivated, and their silence spoke louder than any words of apology or explanation ever could. I walked away from the wedding hall with a sense of completion, not vengeance, not confrontation, but triumph. A triumph born from perseverance, strategic action, and unyielding self-belief. I had risen above every obstacle, and in doing so, I had discovered the most profound truth. The ultimate victory is the life you build despite betrayal, the person you become despite heartbreak, and the resilience you cultivate when the world underestimates you. As I stepped into the night, I felt the exhilaration of true freedom. This was the moment where the past no longer defined me. Choices I made, the actions I took, and the life I built were my own. I was untouchable, unstoppable, and ready for every adventure the future held. And so, with the city lights shining around me and a heart full of quiet satisfaction, I embraced the ultimate truth of my journey. I had survived, I had thrived, and I had claimed a life that no one could ever take away. This was not just an ending, it was the beginning of everything I had always deserved. Months had passed since the wedding, but the echoes of that day lingered in my mind. The shock on their faces, the subtle shifts in perception, and the quiet validation of my journey were unforgettable. But my life was no longer defined by moments of confrontation, it was now defined by growth, impact, and the legacy I was building for myself. I had moved into a larger apartment, still modest by city standards, but reflecting my hard-earned independence. My career continued to flourish. Projects I had once dreamed of leading were now in my portfolio, and my name was gaining recognition in professional circles. But more than fame or accolades, I cherished the respect I had earned, a respect grounded in resilience, intelligence, and determination rather than influence, money, or manipulation. One morning, as I walked to work, my phone buzzed with a message from a former colleague. "Your latest project is being featured in the industry newsletter. Everyone is talking about your strategy. It's amazing work, Mia." I smiled, realizing that my efforts were no longer invisible. People were noticing the results I produced, and for the first time, recognition felt effortless because it was a direct reflection of my competence, not my presence in someone else's shadow. That evening, I attended a networking event in the city's heart, surrounded by professionals I had once admired from afar. As I entered the room, I noticed a subtle but powerful change in how people approached me. Colleagues who had doubted me before now sought my insights. Mentors spoke of my potential, and even newcomers listened intently to every word I said. The respect I had worked for quietly but unmistakably permeated the room. At one point, a young professional approached me, eyes wide with admiration. "Mia, I've heard so much about your story, your journey, how you built yourself from scratch. It's inspiring." I paused, letting the weight of my experience settle between us. "Thank you," I said softly but confidently. It wasn't easy, but every challenge, every setback, and every moment of doubt was part of the journey. If you embrace the struggle, you can turn it into strength. It struck me how far I had come. I was no longer defined by betrayal, heartbreak, or manipulation. I was defined by my choices, my achievements, and the life I had created despite adversity. Later that week, I received an unexpected call. It was a journalist asking to feature my story in a professional magazine. They wanted to highlight my journey, from heartbreak and betrayal to resilience and career success. The interview required me to recount parts of my past I had rarely shared publicly, but I agreed, recognizing the value in showing others that transformation was possible. Sitting in the quiet of the studio, recounting the email, the betrayal, the years of struggle, and the eventual triumph, I felt a strange mix of vulnerability and empowerment. Sharing the story was not about seeking sympathy. It was about inspiring others to recognize that setbacks could be catalysts for growth, that pain could fuel determination, and that even when life seems unfair, Your choices define your destiny. The article went live a week later, and the response was overwhelming. Messages flooded in: strangers, colleagues, even young professionals, thanking me for sharing my journey. "Your story gave me hope," one wrote. "I've been struggling, but reading about how you rebuilt your life reminded me I can do it too." I realized that my triumph had evolved beyond personal validation. It had become a legacy, an example of perseverance, courage, and the power of taking control of one's life. The recognition wasn't just for me. It was for everyone who had faced betrayal, heartbreak, or failure and still chosen to rise. Even Sarah and my cousin remained in the background of my life, occasional reminders of a past I had overcome. I never sought to humiliate them or revel in their shock. Instead, their continued presence in my memories served as proof of the contrast between what had been and what I had become. Their disbelief was now part of the narrative, quietly reinforcing the journey I had undertaken. My father, too, began to see the consequences of his choices. Though our relationship remained complicated, power dynamic had shifted. He could no longer control or influence me. The daughter he once tried to manipulate had become a woman who charted her own path, earned her own respect, and cultivated a life entirely on her own terms. The legacy I built wasn't limited to career success. I also began mentoring young professionals, guiding them through challenges, and sharing lessons learned from my journey. Each conversation reinforced the idea that true power lies not in wealth or influence but in resilience, intelligence, and the ability to navigate life's obstacles with grace. As I walked through the city one evening, reflecting on the article's impact and the messages of admiration, I realized something profound. The greatest recognition comes not from applause, not from titles or accolades, but from the quiet knowledge that your life, built with integrity and perseverance, inspires others to rise. And in that moment, I understood that my journey, from heartbreak and betrayal to empowerment and recognition, was far more than a personal triumph. It was a story of transformation, turning adversity into strength, and of building a life so compelling that it commands attention without needing to shout. For the first time in years, I felt complete, not because I had proven anyone wrong, but because I had proven myself right. I had survived the ultimate betrayal, thrived in the face of adversity, and created a legacy that would endure far beyond the echoes of looking out at the city skyline that night. I knew the story wasn't over. Life would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new adventures. But now I faced them with unshakable confidence, a clear sense of purpose, and the knowledge that I was fully in control of my destiny. The legacy I had begun to build, the recognition, the mentorship, and the example of resilience was only the beginning. And as I stepped back into my apartment, the lights of the city reflecting off the windows, I felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The past had shaped me, but it no longer defined me. The betrayal that once seemed catastrophic had become the fire that forged my life. And now, fully realized, fully empowered, I was free. Free to pursue dreams, free to inspire, and free to live a life that was mine entirely, unapologetically, and beautifully. Weeks had passed since the wedding, yet the memories lingered with a vivid clarity that refused to fade. I often found myself sitting in quiet moments, reflecting not just on the triumphs, but on the long, painful journey that had shaped me into the woman I had become. These reflections were no longer tinged with bitterness. They were filled with gratitude for the lessons learned and the strength gained. The first lesson, glaringly obvious now, was that betrayal does not define your worth. The email, the $50,000 bribe, Sarah's decision to leave me, and my cousin's smug victory had all seemed like insurmountable barriers at the time. But looking back, I realized they had been the crucible in which my resilience was forged. Betrayal hurt, yes, but it also revealed who I truly was, and more importantly, who I could become. I thought about my father. His choices had caused immense pain, yet even that was part of my growth. I understood, for the first time, that people act according to their limitations, their fears, and their values, not necessarily yours. And once I accepted that, I stopped seeking validation from those who could not provide it and began building a life based on my own standards, my own principles, and my own ambitions. Sarah's reaction at the wedding was another reminder. People often assume they have control, that their schemes and plans are unshakable. But life has a way of leveling the field. Power, influence, and manipulation are fragile when faced with determination, strategy, and self-reliance. The lesson here was clear. Never underestimate the potential of someone who has been dismissed or wronged, and never rely on others to dictate your destiny. I also reflected on the years I had spent rebuilding myself, those long nights in the apartment, the endless work, the doubts, and the minor victories that often went unnoticed. Those experiences taught me patience and persistence. Success, I realized, is rarely instant, it's cumulative. Every small effort compounds into something powerful and unstoppable. The lesson was small steps, consistent effort, and relentless focus create results far beyond what immediate gratification can provide. Mentorship had become a new part of my life, and in helping others, I discovered another profound truth. True empowerment is amplified when shared. When I guided young professionals, shared my experiences, and offered advice drawn from personal struggle, I saw how much impact one story, one life, one example could have. My journey was no longer just about me. It had transformed into a beacon for others navigating their own hardships. Another lesson crystallized in moments of solitude. Confidence is not arrogance. It's quiet authority built on preparation and experience. It was one thing to achieve success, but the real power came from carrying oneself with dignity and calm assurance. When Sarah and my cousins saw me at the wedding, they weren't just reacting to my career achievements, they were reacting to my presence, my composure, and my ability to exist unapologetically in the life I had created. That realization reinforced an important truth. How you carry yourself often speaks louder than words or accomplishments. Reflecting further, I saw how crucial it had been to embrace discomfort. Every challenge I faced, whether professional setbacks, personal loneliness, or the crushing weight of betrayal, had forced me to grow. The lesson was unavoidable. Comfort zones are traps. True growth lies in navigating challenges that seem overwhelming. Each hardship, each struggle, was not an obstacle to avoid but a stepping stone to mastery over oneself and one's destiny. I also thought about the concept of closure. Many people assume closure comes from apologies, explanations, or confrontations, but my journey had revealed a deeper truth. Closure comes from thriving despite the past, not from seeking validation from those who wronged you. Seeing Sarah and my cousin's shocked reactions was satisfying. Yes, but it was secondary to the ultimate closure I felt in my own heart, knowing I had built a life that could not be shaken by their choices. Gratitude became another recurring thought in my reflections. Gratitude for the struggles that forced growth, for the betrayals that sharpened resolve, for the loneliness that taught independence. Gratitude for the mentors who believed in me when others had abandoned faith, and for the opportunities that allowed me to transform effort into achievement. Gratitude, I realized, was not a passive emotion. It was a recognition of how hardship, effort, and perseverance intersect to produce profound transformation. Perhaps the most important lesson of all was self-belief. Every rejection, every manipulation, every heartbreak had tested my faith in myself, and every victory, every recognition, every milestone had reaffirmed it. I had learned that no one could instill belief for me, and no one could undermine it unless I allowed them to. True strength comes not from external validation but from an unshakable internal confidence in your own worth and abilities. Reflecting on the city lights from my apartment window, I realized how far I had come. From the girl who received that devastating email, heartbroken and uncertain, to the woman who commanded respect, built a legacy, and inspired others. This journey was nothing short of extraordinary. And while the story of betrayal had been painful, it was also a gift in disguise, catalyst that had forced me to rise, innovate, and thrive. I smiled softly, knowing that my reflections were not mere nostalgia. They were reminders, lessons etched into my being. tools I could carry into every challenge and opportunity ahead. Past no longer haunted me. It had become the foundation of a future filled with possibilities. And in that reflection, I found serenity. I no longer needed approval from the people who had wronged me. I no longer needed to prove my worth externally. I had internalized the ultimate truth. Life's trials are the forge that creates strength, resilience, and greatness, and those who endure and rise become unstoppable. Looking forward, I saw a horizon filled with opportunities one had once only dreamed of. Projects, mentorship, travel, and personal growth awaited me. But beyond achievements, the real victory was in the knowledge that I had survived, thrived, and emerged unshakable. The lessons of betrayal, struggle, and perseverance would remain with me forever, guiding every choice, every action, every interaction. As I set down my coffee and gazed out at the city lights, I whispered quietly to myself, "This is only the beginning." The journey was hard, the pain was real, but the growth, the transformation is mine, and no one can ever take it away. And in that quiet reflection, I felt the full weight and beauty of my journey, the lessons learned, the strength gained, and the life fully reclaimed. Past had shaped me, but it did not control me. I was a woman defined not by betrayal, but by her courage, resilience, and unwavering determination to. Years had passed since the email that had once shattered my world. The betrayal, the heartbreak, and the manipulations of Sarah, my cousin, and even my father were no longer wounds. They were the foundation upon which I had built a life I could be proud of. Every choice I made, every risk I took, and every victory I earned was a declaration. I was no longer defined by the past. I was defined by the life I had created. I woke up one morning in my new apartment, sunlight spilling across the floor, illuminating a space filled with memories of triumph. The walls were adorned with mementos of achievements, certificates, photos from milestones, letters from grateful ments, and snapshots of travels I had once dreamed about. Each item was a reminder not just of success, but of the journey that had brought me here. Stepping onto the balcony, I looked out at the bustling city below. Life moved at its usual pace, oblivious to my personal victories. Yet for me, every street, every light, and every sound was infused with a sense of freedom that I had fought for and earned. I thought back to the girl who had cried over a single email, who had believed her life was over, and I smiled. That girl had survived, evolved, and ultimately triumphed. Professionally, my life was thriving. Projects I had once considered impossible were now within my reach. My reputation had grown beyond what I could have imagined. People sought my expertise, colleagues admired my strategy, and the industry began to recognize me as a leader. But the true victory was not in recognition or accolades. It was in the independence and agency I had reclaimed. My decisions, my successes, and my happiness were entirely mine. Mentorship became a cornerstone in my life. I shared my story with young professionals, guiding them through challenges, offering insights drawn from my struggles, and emphasizing the importance of resilience. The past does not dictate your future, I told them. Your choices, your perseverance, and your courage do. Watching others transform inspired me even further. My legacy was growing not through wealth or status, but through the empowerment of others. Socially, my life had transformed as well. Friends who had stood by me during the hardest times remained constants, while new connections flourished naturally, drawn not by obligation but by authenticity and mutual respect. I discovered the joy of surrounding myself with people who uplifted me, supported me, and celebrated my successes without envy or manipulation. And then there were moments of quiet reflection, moments when I thought about Sarah, my cousin, and my father. Their roles in my life had shifted dramatically. They were no longer sources of pain or control. They were reminders of resilience, catalysts for personal growth, and benchmarks against which I could measure my transformation. I no longer needed their approval or validation. I had earned freedom and self-respect. Financial independence was another pillar of my new life. I had invested wisely, built assets, and created multiple streams of income. Money was no longer a measure of my worth, but a tool to expand opportunities, pursue passions, and maintain security. The irony wasn't lost on me. The $50,000 intended to manipulate my life had been transformed into lessons, motivation, and ultimately into a life of prosperity that no bribe could have ever bought. Travel became a source of joy and inspiration. I visited cities I had dreamed of, explored cultures I had admired from afar, and immersed myself in experiences that expanded my perspective. Each trip reinforced the lesson that life is vast, full of possibilities, and that freedom is the greatest reward of resilience and determination. Romantically, I allowed myself to remain open but cautious. Trust had been shattered once, but I had learned the importance of boundaries, discernment, and valuing self-worth. Love, I realized, must never come at the cost of freedom or dignity. Instead, it should complement a life already rich in purpose and fulfillment. As I sat on the balcony one evening, reflecting on the years that had passed, I felt a profound sense of closure. The betrayals, heartbreak, and setbacks were no longer burdens. They were the crucible that had forged my character, strength, and vision. Every tear, every sleepless night, and every moment of doubt had contributed to the woman I had become, confident, empowered, and unshakable. And yet, the most remarkable realization was simple. True freedom isn't just external, it's internal. It's the ability to wake up every day and live by your own rules, make decisions that align with your values, and pursue goals that resonate with your soul. It's the calm certainty that no one can control your narrative, and no one can diminish your worth. The city lights shimmered below, and I felt a sense of infinite possibility. The woman I had become was not just a survivor, she was a creator, a leader, and a beacon of resilience. Past could no longer harm me, and the future was mine to define. Every step forward, every choice made, and every opportunity seized was a testament to the power of persistence and self-belief. I whispered quietly to myself, a mantra that had carried me through the hardest moments. I am the author of my story. I am the architect of my life. I am free, I am strong, and I am unstoppable. And in that moment, I realized the ultimate victory: freedom, empowerment, and the joy of a life fully reclaimed. No email, no betrayal, no manipulation could ever take this away. My life was mine, unapologetically, beautifully, and irrevocably. The future stretched before me, brimming with potential, excitement, and the promise of adventures yet to be lived. The journey had been long and difficult, but the destination was more than worth it. I had emerged from the fire of heartbreak into a life of power, confidence, and unshakable freedom. And with that, I stepped into the night, embracing a life that was entirely, gloriously mine, a life of ultimate freedom, triumph, and infinite possibility.